Hello, everybody. My name is Dan, and today I would like to show you 1817 and show you how to play. Okay, so if you're here, you're probably familiar with the 18xx genre, and 1817 might strike you as a pretty interesting year to have on the cover of the box because 1817, there were no trains back then. Instead, what the year 1817 refers to is the year that the New York Stock Exchange opened in New York City, and that should give you a clue as to what the focus of this particular game is. Probably more so than any other 18xx game, this game gives you a wealth of financial tools to help maximize your company's profits and your profits in that race to financial victory. So typically in 18xx games, when you think of financial shenanigans, you tend to think of things like dumping companies that you've already bled dry. And in this game, you've got things like short selling, acquisitions, mergers, liquidation, friendly sales, and all these fun things that you're going to learn about today. Oddly enough, you might even call this a run good companies kind of game because typically you're not dumping those companies, you're just pulling the levers and trying to maximize your profits. If this is your first 18xx game, thanks for watching the video, but do not play this, at least not yet. You're going to want to get yourself a couple of plays of a simpler game like 1830, 1889, maybe some variants like 1846, 49, 56, those kinds of things that are a little bit more friendly before you move up to this tier of 18xx. This is really a game that is one of the granddaddy heavyweight champions of 18xx, alongside other such games such as the 1822 system, 1822 CA MX, and also maybe 1841, one of those real heavy games. You want to work your way up to this, and this video is going to proceed assuming that you kind of have a pretty good working knowledge of how an 18xx game works. All right, so like any good board game, we have to ask ourselves, how does the game end? Because in this game, there is no limit to the bank size. If you can read that, bank size is unlimited. Typically at the table, you can get away with having your $12,000 bank like you would with 1830. But if you have any extra poker chips, you might want to bring those out because you might need more. If any person goes bankrupt during the course of the game will actually continue, and that person will just be out of the game. So either have some sort of alternate entertainment ready for them, or maybe some groups might feel more comfortable calling the game at that point. But rules as written, bankruptcy does not end the game. How does the game end then? Well, let me open this bag of trains. Here are the permanent trains and on the back there are twos. The last permanent train is the 8. So once the first 8 enters the game, either by export or a player purchasing it, then you will have 3 more operating rounds before the end of the game. So you get 3 rounds to use your 8s if you can, and then the game will be over. You'll determine the winner as usual. It will be the sum total of cash on hand, the value of your shares, and in this case, the negative value of your shorts. So shorts will count against you based on the stock price in the market. Since I mentioned shorts, what is short selling? You might have heard the term, you might know what it means, but in case you don't, short selling is a technique that's borrowed from stock trading. The concept is, if you want to make some money, you take a share of a company that you predict is going to go down in value. So you borrow that share and immediately you sell it. And some time goes by, the stock price drops, and then at a future date, you buy that share back and then return it to the person or the broker that lent it to you. Having sold high and then in the future bought low, you've made a profit. Now this is highly speculative because, if you borrow a share of, say, Apple back in 1990, and you still have that short sale, you're on the hook for quite a lot of money. Shorts are inherently riskier than buying stocks because the worst that a bought stock can do is just tank, and you've just lost the entirety of your investment. If you short something, the sky is the limit for how much you could potentially owe if the stock actually does good. This is handled basically with these pairs of stocks. This would be the borrowed stock, and this pink certificate would be the short. And if the company pays out, you would actually have to pay the bank rather than the bank paying you. Later, you would buy this share back and then hopefully make a profit. Anyways, that's the general concept of short selling. We'll probably get into a little bit more deeper as we go on. A couple things about the map. You'll notice there are no dits or small towns. Toronto doesn't really count. That's a city, just like any other. It just happens to automatically upgrade, and you can't place a city or a station token there because it's not in the U.S. There are also no station icons for home stations, and there are certain places on board, such as Cleveland and Toronto, which will automatically upgrade, similar to the way off-board locations upgrade. The difference here is that you can station in Cleveland and you can pass through Toronto. So the starting bank is going to be $1,260 split between the players. So for example, in a 4-player game, you'd have $315 each. However, rather than your traditional 1830 style private auction, the private auction in 1817 works a little bit differently. And why don't I just lay out the privates, and we can go over them and explain how you're going to execute the initial auction. Okay, like I said, this auction is not like 1830. There is no set order to the privates. They're only numbered in terms of increasing value printed on the card, and they usually actually sell for under their face value. As you'll note here, there is $200 of seed money from external investors. And what we're going to do is bid on these private companies. We will probably buy one for under its face value, and whatever the difference is will come out of that seed money and help fund the company that you've bought. So for example, this major mail contract is worth a face value of $120. I might bid $100 on it, and the seed money would pay the remaining $20. Basically, I got a free $20 worth of value for my bid. Another thing you'll notice is there's no real revenue. Rather than having your major companies buy in your privates, let's say in the green phase, what you will do is you will use these companies' face value to help fund your starting companies. And we'll see that once we go through the end of the initial auction. Whoever was determined to be the first player will choose a private company to start bidding on, and then it will go around. Almost all the auctions in this game are, if you're bidding on something, if you pass, then you're out. So if player number 1 bids on a mail contract, everyone starts bidding on that particular mail contract, and if they pass, that's it. They will pay the winning bid and take the private. The seed money is always $200. Theoretically, that can run out if you're really underbidding, but typically the ratio of how much everybody wants to underpay versus what sort of special powers they want their companies to have balances out so that I've never been in a game where we really even approach that $200. My experience is these privates usually go for about 75 to 80% of face value, with a couple of exceptions. The extra train station will be a little bit closer to 100, and the Pittsburgh steel mill will typically go for more than face value because it's so powerful. One thing to note, the rules as written say that you cannot spend more than the face value, but the variant of allowing you to pay more than face value is so popular mainly because of the Pittsburgh company, and we'll get into that in just a second. So you've bought a couple companies. If you're still in the top level auction where you're just choosing which company to put up for bid, you can pass and just say, I don't want to choose just yet, and it will come back around to you and you can choose something else. The exception is if all four players pass consecutively, then any remaining privates are removed from the game. And the person to the left of the last person to start the auction starts the first stock round and will start their first company. Anyways, before we get to that, let's go through all the privates and what they do. First, we'll talk about the train station. As you'll see in the main game, station markers are prepaid, and you only get so many based on how large your company is. So to start your first company, you will have one station marker. This one will give you a second one for free right at the start of the game. So that could be a pretty powerful benefit depending on where you are, hence the relatively high value of the train station. The mail contracts are also pretty simple. You'll see a value in the envelope. The company that owns the mail contract, as long as they start their operating round with a train, then they will earn that amount into their treasury. The bridge companies. You'll notice they come with some bridge tokens. These tokens can be added to any tiles that are laid at Louisville, Cincinnati, or Charleston, these three cities down on this river. In addition, you'll notice this river has a terrain cost of $10. Any company owning one of the bridge companies does not have to pay that $10 to build on those tiles. One more note, there is no connectivity required to place a bridge token. And I believe you can place a bridge token even after the initial tile has been laid. Next are the coal mines. This one is similar to the bridge company in that it comes with value-adding tokens, but these are a little bit trickier to place. Coal tokens are allowed to be put down on these mountain hexes as long as A, the mountain hex is within 1 hex distance of a city. So for example, if we're looking at Pittsburgh, we know that these three are eligible for coal tokens. In fact, one of the few that is not eligible is this one right here, right in the middle of Pennsylvania. There is no white city adjacent to it. Now, when deciding to place a coal token, the restriction is that if you are laying a tile, that tile's track has to point back to that adjacent city in order to place this coal token on it. So this is valid, whereas this is not, because neither of these have cities on them. So make sure you point back to a city. How does this function? Basically, any train running through it counts it like a DIT. It adds 10 to the value of that train. However, this does not count as a revenue stop. So if we had enough tiles out, you could run from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia with just a 2 train and you would pick up an extra $10 of revenue for that route. Once you place a coal token, this particular tile that you lay down, you don't have to pay the $15 fee for terrain. That's great. The downside, though, is that this track underneath can never be upgraded to a green or brown tile. Once it's set, it's set. Next up, we'll talk about the mountain engineers. This is fairly simple. If you have the mountain engineers company, you still have to pay the $15 terrain cost unless you're laying a coal token. But once you pay them, you will receive $20 for every yellow tile that you place there. But you have to afford that $15 first. And lastly, Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh steel mill. All this does is it gives you this special Pittsburgh tile, and whichever company owns this may place this tile on Pittsburgh. There you go. Or there you go. Either orientation. Functionally, it is just like a Baltimore tile. It's value of 30 and it's got 3 spokes. It just goes in Pittsburgh. Now, if you're starting your company in Pittsburgh, this is a really awesome thing to do because you're going to lay down your home station there and boom, you've got extra value. If you don't have this private though, and you start in Pittsburgh, well, then you just have to start with like a regular old tile. And it's going to be $20 and it's going to be a lot less value. So typically, foreshadowing, if you end up winning the Pittsburgh steel mill, you're probably going to want to start a company in Pittsburgh so that you can take advantage of this tile. Because if somebody else starts Pittsburgh, then your company usually isn't that incentivized to help increase their value for free. There's a little bit of chicken that can be played. If the winner of this will typically start Pittsburgh for cheap, and then you'll want to bid it up in order to make them pay a little bit more for it. But they can also just say, well, you can have it, and Pittsburgh will be a piece of crap town. So that's an interesting dynamic once the first stock round starts, which is what we'll get into right now. So after all the privates are bought and distributed, you start the first stock round. And pretty much the only thing that you can do in the first stock round is start companies. These will be 2-share companies because that's all you can do this early in the game. And the process goes like this. Whoever has priority deal, or basically whoever's turn it is, but it starts with priority deal, they will place a bid on the presidency of a new company, and they will announce where that company is going to start. Let's say we're going to start in Charleston. I pick a company, I grab the Grand Trunk Western, and so I will get its tokens ready, and I'm going to place an initial bid. The money that I have to play with is basically however much cash I have left from the auction and whatever value of privates that I have. So in this case, let's make it super simple. Let's say I had $100 left and I have these two, which add up to $140. I would have $240 worth of value, which is pretty crappy for a 4-player game, but this is just an example. So I say I'm going to bid, let's say $100 on Charleston. The $100 is the presidency. So the stock price of the resulting company will actually be $50 because it's a 2-share company, $50 per share, and I've put $100 in, I would get the presidency. If anybody else wants the company to start in Charleston, they can bid me up. Once everybody else passes, whoever has the highest bid gets to take the presidency of Charleston. And whatever the highest bid is, half of that, round it down, will be the starting stock price of the Grand Trunk Western in Charleston. By the way, you'll also notice this red box. That goes from 50 to 200. If you double that, that's 100 to 400. Those are the ranges of bids that you can make during this auction. You can't bid more than 400, and you can't bid less than 100 to start a company. Keep that in mind. Little word to the wise. You'll notice there are 3 underlined numbers on the stock market. This is a little bit of foreshadowing, but let's say you start a company with a bid of $110, you have that, and your company share value is 55. During the first operating round, as most 18xx players will know, you won't have a train, so you won't be able to pay out, and your stock value will fall. We're going to talk about loans here in a little bit. You're probably going to want to take 2 loans so that you can afford trains, and for those 2 loans, your stock price is going to fall 2 spots. You're still safe because you have not fallen into this acquisition zone, which we're going to talk about a little farther down the line. This is bad if you let your stock price fall this much. So 55 is the minimum for a 2-share company to take maximum loans and still be safe. 70 is if you're starting a 5-share company later in the game, and 120 is the safety spot for starting a company with 10 shares and taking 10 loans right off the bat, which is pretty insane. At least I think so. But anyway, that's what those underlined values mean, and it explains that right there. But in case you're wondering what this actually means, hopefully that shines some light on it. Anyways, we've bid on this company. Let's say we've bid 150, right? Half of that is 75. I have to round down, so the stock price is 70, right? How am I going to pay for that company? We had $100. We had a $60 private and an $80 private. I have to put these together in some fashion to pay the $150 that I bid. I could do 90 and 60. So I start it with this company and I put $90 into the treasury of the new company. Or I could put both of these privates into the company and just give it $10 in the treasury. As you'll see in the operating rounds, a good tip is that when you start a 2-share company, you're going to want to, or in the first round, you're going to want to put $10 at least into its treasury. Otherwise, you won't be able to buy 2 trains. And that's because of the loan mechanism. We'll talk about that in just one second. The key takeaway here is what you're bidding on is the presidency, which is 2 shares. So whatever half of the winning bid is, that's going to be your stock price. And whatever the bid is, however you pay it, goes into the treasury. The company is started. The token is not laid yet, but it's reserved. So now no other companies can start in Charleston until you upgrade to like a green city, let's say. If this is the case later in the game, there is a company in Charleston, but if somebody wants to start a new company, this space is free so they can start in Charleston. Before we go on, one thing, in case it wasn't clear, all of the companies in the game are functionally the same. There are 20 companies, but you can pick whichever ones you want and start them wherever you want. They're just 20 different companies so that you have enough tools to go through the game, because people can have 3 or 4 companies in some cases. Anyways, what you see here is the starting condition of the loan market. Each one of these red death colored cubes is a loan cube, and they're worth $100. And the reason we're talking about this first is because this round marker over here starts in the stock round, and as it passes into the first operating round, you'll see it says set the interest rate. So at the beginning of the game, nobody has any loans, and the interest rate is $5. Let's say as companies take out pairs of loans to get $200 because they're going to want to buy some trains. Let's say we've got 1 company, 2 companies, 3 companies. Let's say we're in a 4-player game and everybody has started 2 companies. So there's company number 5, company number 6, company number 7. Ooh, all these trains getting bought. Well, here's the end of the first operating round. As each company operates, it has to pay at the end of its operating round the interest rate for the round times the number of loans that they have in their possession. So as the first operating round went on, each of these companies took 2 loans, and at the end of their turn, they had to pay $10 interest because they had 2 loans and the interest rate's $5. Now, as we move into the second OR, assuming no more loans move, you're going to have to set the interest rate at the first row that has a missing loan cube. So we would move it down to $20. Those same companies that were paying $5 a loan are in operating round 2 going to have to pay $20 a loan at the end of their operating round. And some loans might be able to be paid back, or even more could get taken out. No matter how many cubes move in and out of the market for the entire operating round until just before the next operating round, the interest rate is going to stay in place. But right before an operating round, you determine where the interest rate has to be for the operating round, because soon those fees are going to become due. All right, so I'll get a charter out and we'll walk you through the operating rounds. Okay, so I pulled out a charter representing the EJE, and let's walk through the structure of the charter. You'll see I have the 2-share presidency worth 100% of the company. Okay, so along the left side of the charter, there are 7 spots for 7 of your 8 possible tokens. At the beginning of the game, unless you got the train station private, you only have 1 token, and that is your home token out on the board, which you place as part of your first operating round. You're going to have access to 7 more potentially, so the space for that is off to the left. Typically what I do is I just have these face down, and as they become available a couple of different ways throughout the game, I will flip them up, icon side up, to show them that they are available. Also in the upper corner, you'll see by default, every company is a 2-share company. You also have these tokens to show if you develop those into 5-share companies or 10-share companies by just placing that disk over top to show that the company size is different. We'll talk about how you grow up companies later, but what you can see here is that you have space for loans, and you basically can take on as many loans as you have shares out in the game. So in the beginning of the game, you can take out a maximum of 2 loans. Here's a guide to the different phases of the game. Really handy information in the treasury is the order of how you do the operating rounds, and a couple helpful reminders here. So let's walk through the order of operations as we see it on the charter. First, obviously, is we're going to lay or upgrade track. We will start in whatever our home city is, and you kind of simultaneously place your home station at the same time that you lay your tile. So you can, let's say, well, let's do Philadelphia, right? This is bad track lay, but I just had the gentle available. So we can lay that for 20 revenue. And then if we want to pay an extra $20, we can lay a second yellow tile. The first action later in the game could also be an upgrade, but the second action, which costs $20, is always only laying a yellow tile. Next is to place a station marker. In the beginning, you only have 1 available station marker. You don't have to pay any money because all the markers that you will have access to have already been prepaid. Once you have them, you can just lay them for free in this step. Running trains, that's pretty obvious if you know how any 18xx game works. There are no dits to worry about. A 2 train runs between 2 stops, 3 train, so on and so forth. Remember, the coal tokens, if you run through them, they do not count as stops. If, for example, If you run this 2-train, you don't have access to that coal token there, but you would have access to any bonus revenue on those coal tokens. So a 2-train running here would be 3, 2 to $70, right? This, again, would not count unless there's an actual route being run on that line. Coincidentally, this is a particularly good setup for the Charleston player if they have coal tokens, because you can run a nice 2-train here and a nice 2-train there for pretty much some of the best revenue in the early game. Just a little beginner tip for you guys. Anyways, once you have your revenue, you can either pay out in full, pay half, or withhold. Paying in full, you divide your revenue by the number of shares. In the 2-share company case, it's pretty nice because 100% of the money will just go to you. And then further on down the line, 5 shares, 10 shares, you actually have to distribute it amongst the shares. A note about half paying: if you have a 10-share company, let's say you ran for, 110. If you divide that and pay out half, you're paying out 55, and you can't split 55 between 10 shares. So you actually have to round up in favor of the shareholders. So the company would keep 50, and then each share would pay out $6 for the total of 60. And then, of course, withholding, everything stays in the treasury. There's a handy chart for how you move on the stock market. Of course, if you withhold, you fall in value. If you pay out less than your current stock price, you'll just stay in place. If you pay out at least your current stock price, then you'll go up once. But if you pay out 2 times or more what your current price is, then you can double jump up. I think that's pretty similar to 1846. And of course, if your revenue is massive enough so that you can still pay out your current stock price even by paying out half, you'll still get that jump. It doesn't matter how much money the company ends up keeping in these situations. One last thing about paying dividends. If one of your opponents has one of these short certificates, if you pay out your dividends, let's say you're paying out $10 a share, that player has to pay the bank $10 per share. So shorts can hurt when the company that you're shorting operates and decides to pay out. Next, of course, is everybody's favorite: buy your trains. During the first operating round, and the first operating round alone, you have access to 2 trains. 2 trains cost $100, so typically you'll probably take out 2 loans just to be able to afford this. You'll have to have $10 in your treasury to afford the interest, but taking 2 loans is pretty much how you buy 2 trains. Of course, unless you wanted to buy a single 2-train. In the first operating round, there is an infinite number of 2 trains available for purchase. Once that is done, you'll see at the end of the operating round, you have to export a train. Whatever the top train on the stack is, in this case, one of those infinite 2 trains gets removed from the game. Once that happens, all the 2s are removed from the bank until you get to the 2+ train. And starting in the second operating round, these will be available for purchase. They also cost $100, and there's 4 of them. The only difference is once the 4s come out, they will not rust immediately. They'll get one more run before they have to be discarded. Next is the 3s, of course, and they cost more, and so on and so forth. And then play proceeds as normal. But in that first round, there's as many 2s as are needed by companies to buy. One more thing about buying trains. In this game, there's no requirement to buy trains, and thus there is no emergency train buying mechanism. So if you don't have a train and you want to avoid liquidation, then you either have to buy a train outright or take loans to pay for it. If you cannot afford a train, then you're just not going to buy a train. If you end the operating round without a train, then wherever your stock token is, you immediately put that into liquidation, which is going to come into play very shortly. The next step is to pay interest. Simple. You look at the number of loans that you have, you multiply that by the interest rate on the loan market chart, which you've set before the operating round started, and you have to pay that much. If you cannot pay that amount, then the president must contribute his or her own personal money to help cover that. If the personal cash is gone, then you enter a cash crisis and you have to start selling your shares in companies. If you can't do that, you end up being bankrupt. Always plan on what your loan interest is going to be as best you can, and try and plan accordingly. After you have paid interest, then, if you have enough cash in your treasury, then you can repay any number of loans. So if you have multiples of $100 lying around, you can say, hey, I'm going to take this cube, put $100 back into the bank, and there we go. Another note I might not have said about taking loans. For every loan that you take, I did say this, but it bears repeating. For every loan that you take, at any point in the game, you're going to move down one space on the stock market track, right? So there, I just took 2 loans. As I pay those loans back, my stock price will move up for each loan that I pay off. So you can see that reminder here. 1 step left, 1 step right. Lastly, check to make sure you're not in liquidation and that you have a train. Once every company has operated top price to bottom price in operating order, then you take that top train and you burn it, you export it. And that's for every operating round. We see export train is what we just did because everybody's operated during the first OR. Then we move into the merger and acquisition round. This is probably the most complicated round of the game, the mergers and acquisition rounds. Basically, we're going to do 2 trips up and down the stock market. The first, we're going to go down, and in operating order, each company is going to have a decision to make. Do they want to do nothing, or do they want to merge with another company, or do they want to convert to a higher share company? Then, once all that's done, we start at the liquidation stage and we go right on the stock market in reverse operating order, and we look into acquisitions of companies by other companies. Key thing to note about the M&A round, all the actions that are being taken here are being taken by the companies, not the presidents of the companies. Even when the presidents act, they're acting on behalf of their companies. So the trip down is how we're going to expand our companies. The first one is to simply merge with another company. 2 shares can merge with 2 shares to form 5s. 5 shares can merge together to form 10s. And that's pretty much the only 2 scenarios. Obviously, if there are different presidents, then they have to agree. But when 2 companies merge, it depends on their size. Let's say that both the Boston and Albany and the EJE, they are 2-share companies. In this case, you have to add the 2 stock values together, and that's the new price. One company survives, and that's a resulting company. Whoever initiated the merger keeps the president's certificate, which is now worth twice as much. If there is another president involved, they will get a free share. But usually that doesn't happen. In this case, the current president would have to buy their extra share to make up for the difference. But In the case of one person, president of two companies, merging them together, which is what often happens, you simply keep one of the presidencies, which is now worth more. Following this is a special stock round. You can buy up to your max, which is 60% of holdings. You can buy shares in this new merged company. In the case of a 5-share, that's just 1 share because 40% plus 20%, that's your max. And then in player order, like as in a stock round, people have the opportunity to buy a share in this new company if they wish and if they can afford it. The president can buy up to the max. Everybody else can either buy one or sell as many of that company that they already had. So if you're going from a 5 to a 10, other people might already have shares in the company. They have the opportunity to sell those shares if they so desire. Any remaining shares will end up being in the treasury, and they'll end up paying the company if it pays out. If two 5-share companies merge, then the merger process is quite a bit simpler. You just take the company that's going away and you exchange its shares for shares number 6 through 10 of the surviving company. In this case, you average the two prices together and the surviving company is there. If you're in between prices, then you round down. Any tokens that the non-surviving company had, either on the board or in its on its charter, now get acquired by the surviving company. So any tokens that were on the board now get replaced with tokens of the surviving company, and any tokens that were on the charter now get flipped over here as being available by the surviving company. The only exception is if the sum total of both companies had more than 8 tokens in play, because 8 is the max you can have. In that case, you start with tokens that are on the board as surviving, and you'll just inherit less on your charter. And of course, if you're ever in a spot where both companies had a token, one of those will come off and survive as a spare token on your charter. So, hooray. Next is conversions. At any point, you can say, I'm going to convert my 2-share into a 5-share, or a 5-share into a 10-share. You cannot convert a 2 directly into a 10. You have to do it step by step. Basically, all you do here is you add the extra shares into the treasury, and of course, you take an appropriate number of short/share pairs and put them into the market, which I'll show you here in a second. This is the bank pool. There's where your spare discarded trains and sold shares go. But if you have a 5-share company or a 10-share company, then you will have 5 or 10 pairs of these shorts and shares as well. So since we have plus and minus, these will cancel out to 0, so they have no effect on gameplay right now, other than that it shows that your company can be shorted in the stock round. So there are 5 available. You cannot short more than 5 shares of a 5-share company. Rules as written, 5 is the limit of shares, period, but the variance of having an extra 5 short shares come into play once it's a 10-share company, that's pretty popular. So that tends to be how pretty much everybody I've played with tends to play. But it is a little bit more brutal because, yeah, you can short somebody's company 10 times over, and that's pretty devastating, as you'll see. As you expand your company into 5 or 10 shares, just make sure the appropriate number of shorts are also out in the game. That same buying of shares and then rotating around for optional stock buying with the merger, that's the same for a conversion. So if I just converted to a 5-share from a 2, I could buy 1 share of the company for stock price, and then everybody else would have a chance to buy one from the treasury as well. Once everyone in the white section of the stock chart has answered the question of whether or not they would like to merge or convert, the first half of the mergers and acquisitions round is done. So the second half of the mergers and acquisition round is going to be the acquisitions, where companies in the white section of the stock market are going to have opportunities to buy other companies, which are either doing poorly or could be doing okay. The format is going to be very similar in that we're going to determine the starting bid for these companies, and then we're going to go around sort of like in a stock round from player to player. But keep in mind, each player is bidding on behalf of one of the companies he or she is president of. So if the bid comes around to me, I can bid, $300, but that amount has to come from one of the companies that I'm the president of. Anybody in the red or gray zone, all their transactions are frozen. So anybody here, you cannot buy or sell their stock, and they cannot participate in this special bidding process to buy other companies. So you determine who has the winning bid, and whoever wins that company, they get the assets of the purchased company, and the purchased company will go away. And there may or may not be compensation to the shareholders of that company. All right, so case number one, liquidation. Let's say it has this on its charter and it's in liquidation, let's say because it doesn't have a train. What we're going to do as step one of a liquidation is we're going to take all of the cash and loans and set them off to the side in a little stack. Anything else, trains, shares, it's going to stay there. After we cleared the cash, we just threw these away into the bank pool. Now, what's the starting bid for liquidation? It's $0. The bank is willing to pay $0 to take over this company. So if anybody wants the assets of this company, they're going to just have to place a bid, but it's guaranteed that this company will not exist by the time the liquidation is done. Whichever company has the winning bid, they pay it, but they don't pay it to the bank. They pay it to this special liquidation stack or failure pile, and that's the winning bid. It was $120. We take this failure pile here and we compare the cash to the loans. We're going to cancel this out until it's either zero or positive. So if there's $400 or more to cancel out these $400 of loans, then that's great. If the cash is short, then the president of the liquidated company has to contribute the difference. Same as before, if they can't afford it, they have to start selling shares, and when they run out of that, they're bankrupt. If you actually have a surplus and you're able to pay off all of the loans and you still have a little bit of cash left over, then this cash is going to pay out to any remaining shareholders. So you won't pay the company back, but any players who still have shares in hand, they will get any fraction of a surplus. Let's say we had $100. If it's a 2-share company, it's $50 a share, $20 for, and so on and so forth. Also, if you've shorted this company, if there is a surplus, then you have to pay, just like the company had paid its last dividends. So lastly, if by some miracle this company did have a train, then the winning company would take that train. If it had any stations out on the board, which it certainly did, then the winning company will acquire those stations. Next up is going to be acquisitions. So companies in acquisitions have not completely run out of money per se, but they've let their stock price drop so much that it's below 40 and all shares are frozen. You can't buy or sell stock, and it's potentially on the auction block. So this is where this comes in after any liquidated companies, but before the friendly sales. $10 is the minimum bid for this company. If no one starts that bid, then this company is allowed to continue to operate. If they can ever pay $40 as dividend, then you can move up. If you can pay $80, then you move up twice. Once you're out of the gray zone, then you're safe. For now. The process of acquiring the company is a little bit different. We don't have the failure pile that we did before, but you're bidding on all the assets, including any cash and loans that are on the charter. So everything that you see here is up for auction, including, of course, any tokens out on the map. If any company wins, then they pay the bid price to the bank. It's important to note that when they win, they can use the treasury money to pay that. Again, like the last case, these shares would have been discarded for no compensation. So it's just the cash and loans on hand. So they're going to inherit the cash, but they're also going to inherit the loans. They can use the cash to help assist paying the winning bid, or maybe they had enough money up front. Before they take complete control over it, they have the option, if they're able, to pay these inherited loans back. If they do not pay off those loans and just, take the cash, this assumes that they would have space to take those loans. Then for each one that they don't pay off, they do the inherited stock bump down. If they manage to pay off those loans, then they don't have the drop. It's important to note, let's say they had 4 loans already. Obviously, one would have to be paid off because you can't take on a 6th loan as a 5-share company, but you can't pay off 3 loans because you're only inheriting 2. These are the only ones you have an opportunity to pay off right now. Whether or not loans are paid off, all the assets are transferred to the winning company. Any player who had shares, they're going to get the bid price divided by the share size as payment. So let's say the company bid $250 for this stuff. It's a 5-share company. Any player who has a share is going to get $50 from the bank because, they paid the bank will pay the shareholders. And likewise, if you've got a short, then you've got to pay that. And similarly, any stations out on the board of the old company get replaced by stations of the new company. Last, but certainly not least, the friendly sales. After we've gone through liquidations and acquisitions in reverse operating order, companies can elect to undergo a friendly sale. Let's say the EJE says, you know what, I'm at $65 a share. I am free for the taking as long as you pay. Just like before, you're offering up all its assets to the company who bids the highest if they want to. Obviously, this sale is not guaranteed if there are no takers, but the minimum bid is much different. Basically, it's the total stock value of the company. So let's say it's $70 a share. There's 5 shares out in existence. $350 is the starting bid. And it's important to note for all these auctions, bid increments are $10, not 5. What's different about a friendly sale is there might be some shares in the treasury. Rather than just throwing these out, you sell them immediately to the bank pool. So since there were 3 stocks in the treasury, 3 times 70 is 210. You would get $210 extra dollars into the treasury as part of this friendly sale, assuming, somebody bids on it. So with an extra $210 in the treasury, everything that you see here is up for auction. This could potentially be way more lucrative. People can fight over this because you might say, hey, if I put this up for auction, I can really maximize my value because I think I'm done with this company. The winning company will pay the bank, and yes, as before, they can use all of these assets to pay for that bid, and it's the same as the acquisition. The only difference being, the shares that were in the treasury are now compensated. So whatever the winning bid is, you divide by the number of shares, any shareholders gets that, yada, yada, yada. And, the whole loan payoff thing. So there's really kind of a subtle difference between acquisition and friendly sale. It's that compensation. So those are the three types of acquisitions. That's the second half of the mergers and acquisitions round. I told you it was going to be complicated. Hopefully I didn't disappoint. It's important to note that if you're about to go in the next OR, you have to set your interest rate again. You do the OR, you export a train, new merger and acquisition round, and then we're back to the stock round, which technically we've already had, but we didn't go into very much detail. So as the final part of this extremely long teaching video, I will go over the options that you have in the stock round. Okay, the stock round is going to be way easier than the mergers and acquisitions round, but you do have a lot more options than you do in your typical 18xx game. Obviously, the stock round starts with the person who has the priority deal card, and then it just keeps going clockwise until everybody passes in a row. That's pretty standard. What's not standard is the options that you have when it's your turn. So the first decision you have to make once your turn is, assuming you're not passing, is are you going to act as yourself, i.e. a single individual, or are you going to act on behalf of one of the companies that you're president of? Based on that decision, you have different options for you. We're going to start by acting individually. So if you're acting for yourself, you have three options, and they have to be taken in this order. 1, you can sell any number of shares that you own to the open market. So let's say I had the share of the EJE. I sell it to the open market. I get $100. What's important to note is that this stock value will not drop until the end of the stock round based on what happens. So I sell it. I get the $100. I can sell multiple shares at a time, get the value, but the value will not change yet. 2, I can sell a company short. So let's say I don't have any EJE, but I would like to short it. What I can do, I will take this pair of a short certificate and an actual share, and I will sell the share. I will get $100. And I just keep this. The only difference is that I can only short one share per turn, whereas real stock certificates that I already had, I could sell any number of those. And of course, as my last potential personal action, I can buy a share. Assuming, this is a new scenario and I wasn't the one who sold that share, I could buy an EJE from the open market for the stock price, or I could buy it from the treasury. If it's from the treasury, my purchase will put the stock price into the treasury. This is obviously an incremental capitalization game. Those are your three options. Again, sell shares regularly, sell short a single share, or buy a single share. The short also counts as a sell, obviously, so you can't short something and then buy it later in the stock round. Once you've sold the company, that's it for the stock round. You can continue to sell, but you can't buy back. Pretty standard across 18xx. You know this stuff already. Rewind. If it comes to your turn, let's say it comes around to me and now I'm the president of the EJE. I can take a stock round action on behalf of the EJE. And it can do two things. Number 1, it can take one or more loans. So it'll take a loan, it'll get $100 into the bank. Keep in mind, I won't have to pay interest on this loan until the end of the next operating round. So this could affect the interest rate of those loans, but I won't have to pay that for a little while. The next thing that I can do, and the only other thing I can do as a company, is I can buy a share, one or more shares from the open market into the treasury. So even if there were, let's say, 2 shares of EJE in the open market, I want to buy those back in so that I get paid when I pay out. Here's $200, Mr. Bank. I will take these back and they will be in my treasury. This is pretty cool for another reason, because if your company has been shorted, then in order for the person to close their short, they have to buy their resolution share from your treasury, and then you will get some money back.
Hey everyone, it's Dan who's doing the editing right now. I figured the best way to do this would be just to do a simple voiceover. One of the things that I forgot to do is to talk about the end of stock round cleanup, namely adjusting the stock prices. The stock price will actually fall left or down based on the number of shares that are in the bank pool. So, for example, if you have 5 shares in the bank pool, then your stock value will drop 5 spots. If, as usual, all the stock is in player hands, then the stock price will go up a single spot. Now, back to my earlier rambling.
Yeah, that was a lot, obviously. 1817, in my opinion, is a game that is well worth learning and putting the time in to wrap your head around these advanced concepts, because once you get familiar with the game, it is so interesting from start to finish. A couple of pointers for newbies to the game. I would say be prepared for your first game, or maybe even a couple games, to go bankrupt. It's a race to get the most value, and as other people gain value quickly, you're going to be left behind in the dust, and before you know it, you're having to buy a Ford train and you've got $5 in your pocket. Just enjoy the experience for what it is, and try and get better. Don't be afraid of loans. They really help you earn money quickly, especially in the early game. In the later game, they're kind of This is a very long game when played out to the full extent. I've had a couple games that I ended up going bankrupt in them, but the games themselves went 7 hours plus to the 8 trains. For a shorter scenario, I know that it's kind of popular to just play through the beginning part of the game until maybe the 4s break and rust the 2s. You'll definitely have a dynamic game, but you might even start to see who's going to be the clear winner from such an early point. Not to say, though, that the later game isn't equally as dynamic. There have been a lot of close ones. I hope this video at least helped demystify it a little bit, so that you get an idea of the different types of things you can do in the game, and if you need a quick reference on how something works. 1817 is definitely one of the best board games I've ever played. Let me know what you thought of the video. Any clarifications or rules questions or anything that I got completely wrong, leave in the comments. And yeah, choo choo.